A poor girl agreed to be the cold CEO's fake wife. Her silence exposed the family's buried scandal. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's return to our main character. Ethan Blackwood had built his empire the way he built everything else in his life. Clean lines, controlled risk, no unnecessary emotion. At 34, he was the youngest CEO ever appointed to lead Blackwood Holdings, a legacy corporation headquartered in downtown Chicago, its glass tower reflecting Lake Michigan like a polished mirror. To the board, he was brilliant. To the media, he was untouchable. To his family, he was a tool to preserve power. And tonight, standing in a private conference room overlooking the city lights, Ethan was about to make a decision that had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with survival. Across the table sat Claire Bennett, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture straight despite the weight pressing down on her chest. She wore a simple navy dress she'd bought on clearance, flats scuffed from miles of walking, her hair pulled back without ornament. She did not look impressed by the skyline. She did not look intimidated by the room. She simply looked prepared to listen. Ethan studied her in silence, noticing what others always missed. The steadiness in her eyes, the way she didn't fidget, the way she waited without asking for reassurance. Most people filled silence with words. Claire let silence exist. I'll be direct, Ethan said at last, his voice calm, even, deliberately stripped of warmth. I need a wife. Publicly, legally, temporarily. He slid a slim folder across the table. A contract marriage. 2 years. You'll be compensated. Generously. Claire did not reach for the folder. She didn't gasp or smile or pretend to misunderstand. She looked at him as if weighing not the money, but the cost. Outside, traffic moved like veins of light, the city unaware that a private transaction was about to rewrite 2 lives. Why me, she asked quietly. Ethan had rehearsed this answer. Because you have no ties to my world, no ambition to exploit it, and because you're running out of options. He said it without cruelty, the way a surgeon states a diagnosis. He knew about her overdue rent, the notice taped to her apartment door, the medical bills she'd been quietly paying down since her mother passed. He knew she worked 2 jobs and still counted grocery dollars. He knew she had turned down offers that came with strings. Claire absorbed the words, her expression unchanged, though something tightened beneath her calm. She glanced at the folder, but still didn't open it. And what do you get? She asked. Ethan's jaw set. Stability. Control. Silence. That last word hung between them. This was the hook he hadn't named out loud. His family needed a scandal buried, and appearances mattered more than truth. A respectable marriage would quiet questions, redirect attention, protect the board vote looming in 90 days. He needed someone who would not speak unless asked, someone who would not fracture under pressure. Someone like Claire. There are rules, he continued. No interviews. No personal disclosures. No involvement in family matters. His eyes met hers. You will not comment on anything you see or hear. Claire finally reached for the folder, not opening it, just resting her palm on the cover as if grounding herself. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. She thought of the eviction notice, the storage unit holding her mother's things, the promise she'd made to herself to survive without becoming something she despised. Then she looked back at Ethan Blackwood, the cold CEO who had just offered her a way out with terms sharper than any blade, and she did something unexpected. She nodded once. I agree, she said. No bargaining. No conditions. No questions. In that moment, Ethan felt a flicker of unease he couldn't explain, a sense that the quiet woman across from him wasn't stepping into his world so much as preparing to expose it, not with accusations or drama, but with something far more dangerous, her silence. Claire Bennett did not sleep that night. She returned to her small 1-bedroom apartment on the south side, the kind with thin walls and a radiator that clicked too loudly in winter, and stood in the center of the room as if seeing it for the last time. The eviction notice was still taped crookedly to the door, the red letters impossible to ignore. 3 days past due, final warning. On the kitchen counter sat a stack of envelopes she had stopped opening because the numbers no longer felt real: hospital statements, late fees, reminders written in polite language that assumed she had options. She removed her shoes, set them neatly by the door, and sank onto the couch that doubled as her bed, pressing her palms together until the shaking stopped. This was the part no one saw, not Ethan Blackwood in his glass tower, not the lawyers who would finalize her future with precise signatures. She had said yes without explaining why, because explaining required vulnerability, and vulnerability had never paid her rent. Claire thought of her mother, how she used to say that dignity was the one thing no one could take from you unless you handed it over. She had promised herself she would never beg, never perform desperation for sympathy. But survival was not the same as surrender. The next morning, she woke before her alarm, brewed weak coffee, and dressed carefully, choosing simple clothes that did not pretend she belonged anywhere else. At 8:45, a black car waited outside, its windows tinted, the driver addressing her by name as if it had always been that way. The ride downtown passed in silence, mile after mile of waking city, and Claire watched familiar streets give way to steel and glass, feeling the distance stretch not just in geography, but in class. At Blackwood Holdings, she was ushered into a private office where legal documents were already laid out with labeled tabs. The attorney explained compensation in calm terms: a monthly stipend that could clear her debts in less than 6 months, health insurance effective immediately, housing provided. Numbers that would have changed everything yesterday now felt strangely abstract. Claire listened, asked only one question about her ability to continue working, and nodded when assured she could, as long as it did not conflict with public appearances. She signed where indicated, her handwriting steady. Ethan arrived midway through, observing without comment, his presence cool and contained. He watched her sign the final page, noting again the absence of hesitation, and for the first time wondered what kind of pressure produced that level of composure. Afterward, he walked her through the penthouse that would become her temporary home, all neutral tones and controlled elegance, explaining rules the way one explained company policy. She acknowledged each with a quiet yes. When he left her alone, the silence expanded, heavy and unfamiliar. Claire stood by the window overlooking the river, city traffic moving like a distant hum, and felt the weight of choice settle in. This marriage was not a dream or a trap. It was a bridge. She would cross it carefully, without drawing attention, without giving anyone reason to question her presence. What Ethan did not know, what no one in the Blackwood family knew, was that Claire had learned long ago how to survive by observing, by remembering, by keeping truths intact until the moment they mattered. Her agreement had not been born of weakness but necessity, and necessity had sharpened her resolve. She would be the wife on paper they required, the silence they demanded, because sometimes silence was not absence but endurance, and endurance was how she planned to make it through the only door left open to her. The wedding took place 7 days later, not because either of them wanted it that way, but because the calendar demanded speed. Blackwood Holdings had a board meeting scheduled in 10 days, and appearances needed to be settled before questions began. There was no cathedral, no long aisle, no friends filling rows with soft murmurs. It was a private ceremony held in a historic courthouse near the river, chosen for its discretion and its efficiency. The room smelled faintly of old wood and polished stone, a place designed for permanence rather than celebration. Claire arrived early, standing near a tall window as sunlight cut across the marble floor. She wore a simple ivory dress tailored to fit, but intentionally unremarkable. No lace, no embellishment, just clean lines. It was the kind of dress that could disappear into a crowd, and that was exactly what she wanted. Ethan entered minutes later, dressed in a dark suit that looked no different from what he wore to close billion-dollar deals. If he felt anything about the day, it did not show on his face. He nodded once in greeting, more like a business acknowledgement than anything personal, and took his place beside her. The officiant spoke in a measured tone, reciting words that had joined strangers for centuries, words about commitment and partnership that felt oddly abstract in the quiet room. Claire listened carefully, not because she believed in the romance of the moment, but because she believed in the weight of promises, even contractual ones. When asked if she agreed, she answered clearly, her voice steady, neither soft nor defiant. Ethan answered the same way, his tone controlled, precise. Rings were exchanged, simple bands chosen to avoid attention, their metal cool against skin. When Ethan slipped the ring onto Claire's finger, his hand hesitated for half a second, a pause so brief it could have been imagined, before completing the motion. Cameras clicked once, twice, a hired photographer capturing proof rather than memory. There was no kiss, only a polite step closer, a practiced stillness that suggested unity without intimacy. To anyone reviewing the images later, they would look composed, appropriate, aligned. Inside, Claire felt a strange calm settle over her. Not happiness, not fear, but resolve. This was done. The path forward, however narrow, was now defined. After the ceremony, they exited through a side door to avoid attention, the city continuing around them as if nothing of consequence had occurred. In the car, the silence returned, thick but not uncomfortable. Ethan reviewed messages on his phone, already shifting focus back to strategy and optics. Claire watched the streets pass by, familiar faces and storefronts blurring together, aware that she was leaving behind a version of herself that would no longer exist. At the penthouse, staff greeted her with respectful distance, calling her Mrs. Blackwood without emphasis, as if testing how the title would sit. She acknowledged them with a nod, careful not to invite assumptions. That evening, Ethan outlined the next steps, upcoming public appearances, a charity dinner, a short statement to be released to the press. He spoke as if she were a capable colleague, not a bride, and she appreciated that more than he knew. When he finished, she surprised him by asking one quiet question, not about money or schedule, but about boundaries. "If there is a situation involving your family," she said, meeting his eyes evenly, "do you want me visible or invisible?" Ethan considered her for a moment, then answered honestly. "Invisible," he said. Claire nodded, accepting the instruction without comment. Later, alone in the guest bedroom that had been prepared for her, she removed the ring and set it carefully on the nightstand. Before placing it back on her finger, testing the weight, the reality of it. She did not cry. She did not smile. She lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling, understanding that this marriage was built on silence by design. What neither of them could yet see was that silence, once chosen, had a way of collecting meaning, and that meaning would not remain contained forever. Life inside the Blackwood world moved according to schedules Claire did not control. Mornings began with quiet efficiency, a housekeeper leaving neatly pressed clothes outside her door, a calendar sent to her phone detailing where she needed to be and when, each entry phrased politely but firmly. Claire followed every instruction without protest, learning quickly that visibility here was curated, not accidental. Her first public appearance came 3 days after the wedding, a charity luncheon hosted by the Blackwood Family Foundation at a downtown hotel overlooking the river. The room shimmered with restrained luxury, white linens, soft music, glasses catching the light, and conversations layered with implication. Ethan stood beside her as they entered, his hand resting lightly at her back, not intimate, just precise enough to signal unity. Claire matched his pace, her posture calm, her expression neutral, aware of the eyes tracking her every movement. Introductions followed in quick succession. Board members, donors, family friends who smiled with practiced warmth and asked questions designed to measure rather than welcome. "Where did you meet? How is married life treating you?" Claire answered briefly when required, letting Ethan fill the space with controlled charm. When questions turned more pointed, she smiled and deferred, exactly as instructed. The real scrutiny came from Ethan's family. His stepmother, Margaret Blackwood, observed Claire with a gaze sharpened by years of social dominance, her compliments edged with curiosity. Ethan's younger half-brother, Lucas, offered polite indifference that barely masked irritation, as if Claire's presence disrupted plans she had never been told about. Claire felt it immediately, the subtle tension that did not belong to her, yet circled her all the same. She noticed how conversations lowered when she approached, how certain names caused quick glances, how the atmosphere shifted whenever Ethan stepped away to take a call. She said nothing. Silence, she reminded herself, was part of the agreement. Later that evening, back at the penthouse, Ethan loosened his tie and reviewed messages while Claire removed her shoes and placed them carefully by the door, a habit from a life where order had been self-made. You handled yourself well, he said without looking up. It was not praise, exactly, but acknowledgement. Claire nodded. I followed the rules. Ethan paused, studying her for a moment longer than necessary. That is all I expect. Days turned into a pattern. Appearances, dinners, brief smiles captured in photographs that would circulate quietly online. Headlines spoke of a surprise marriage, a private romance, a stabilizing chapter for the Blackwood legacy. Claire became a presence without a voice, visible but unreadable, and the family seemed to relax around her silence, assuming it meant ignorance. One afternoon, while waiting in a sitting room during a family meeting she had not been invited to attend, Claire overheard fragments through a partially closed door. Names she did not recognize at first, dates mentioned with unease, a sudden sharpness in Margaret's voice when someone suggested revisiting old records. Claire did not lean closer. She did not record anything. She simply listened, storing details the way she always had, without commentary, without reaction. That night, Ethan found her on the balcony, the city spread beneath them, lights blinking steadily in the dark. You seem unaffected by all of this, he said, not accusing, just curious. Claire turned to him slowly. I am affected, she replied. I just do not display it. He considered that, the wind carrying the quiet between them. In that moment, something unsettled shifted inside him. A faint awareness that the woman he had chosen for her silence might be far more aware than anyone else in the room. Claire returned her gaze to the city, understanding that her role was unfolding exactly as planned, not by speaking, but by remaining present while others assumed she was not paying attention at all. The first real test arrived in the form of a formal dinner at the Blackwood estate, a sprawling property an hour outside the city that had hosted generations of quiet power and carefully edited history. Claire sensed the shift the moment the invitation appeared on her schedule, not as a suggestion but as an expectation, family dinner, attendance required. The drive out was long and silent, trees lining the private road like sentinels, the house itself rising from the landscape with old money confidence. Inside, the air carried the weight of tradition. Portraits lining the walls, each face chosen to be remembered. Margaret Blackwood greeted them with a smile that did not reach her eyes, her kiss to Ethan's cheek lingering just long enough to signal possession. Claire received a brief appraisal, a comment about her dress being modest, appropriate, as if that were a test passed. At the table, conversation moved easily at first, business updates, social events, safe topics designed to warm the room. Claire listened, hands folded, offering polite responses when addressed, nothing more. Then, without warning, Margaret steered the conversation. She mentioned a foundation audit from years ago, a situation that had required discretion, her tone light, but her eyes sharp as they flicked toward Claire. Lucas followed, casually remarking that not everyone understood the importance of family loyalty, that some things were better left unspoken. The words were not accusations, but they carried an edge, probing for reaction. Claire felt the attention narrow onto her, the room subtly waiting. This was the moment they expected her to stumble, to ask questions, to reveal curiosity or fear. She did neither. She lifted her glass, took a measured sip of water, and remained silent. Ethan noticed. He also noticed how Margaret's smile tightened, how Lucas shifted in his seat. Silence, he realized, was not what they had planned for. The dinner continued, tension simmering beneath polite laughter. When dessert was served, a small incident occurred. A staff member hesitated, unsure where to place a dish, and Margaret corrected her sharply. Claire spoke then, her voice calm, thanking the staff member, diffusing the moment with simple courtesy. It was nothing dramatic, nothing defiant, but it changed the temperature of the room. Ethan watched his family recalibrate, unsure how to categorize the woman beside him. Later, as they walked through the quiet hallway toward the guest wing, Ethan slowed his pace. They were testing you, he said, not looking at her. Claire nodded. I know. Why did you not respond, he asked. Because they wanted a response, she replied. He stopped walking then, turning to face her fully. For the first time since their agreement, his expression was not controlled but searching. Most people would have defended themselves, he said. Claire met his gaze evenly. Defending yourself assumes an attack, she said. I was being measured, not accused. The answer unsettled him more than any confrontation could have. That night, as they prepared to retire to separate rooms, Ethan found himself pausing outside her door. "You are doing exactly what I asked," he said quietly. Claire held his gaze. "I am," she agreed. What she did not say was that she was also doing exactly what she had always done, observing, remembering, letting others reveal themselves while assuming she was invisible. As the lights dimmed in the long halls of the Blackwood estate, alliances shifted almost imperceptibly, and the family that believed silence protected them did not yet understand that it was beginning to expose them instead. The days following the family dinner unfolded with a subtle shift in tone that only Claire seemed to notice at first. Invitations became more frequent, not larger events, but smaller, more intimate gatherings where conversations carried weight beneath their polished surface. Luncheons with board members' spouses, quiet tours of foundation offices, moments where Claire was placed just close enough to hear but not expected to participate. She understood the pattern immediately. This was not hospitality. This was surveillance disguised as inclusion. Ethan, for his part, grew increasingly absorbed in work, the upcoming board meeting tightening his schedule and sharpening his focus. He trusted Claire to follow the rules, and she did, standing beside him when required, offering nothing beyond what was asked. Yet Ethan began to notice the way rooms changed after she left, how conversations resumed with a hint of unease rather than relief. One afternoon, while Ethan was still at the office, Claire attended a small planning session for a foundation fundraiser. Margaret was there, seated at the head of the table, her posture relaxed, her voice smooth. As details were discussed, she mentioned a past donor whose name Claire recognized immediately, not from headlines, but from a memory she had never shared. The mention was brief, almost casual, but it confirmed something Claire had suspected since the dinner at the estate. There was a story here that had been carefully compressed, details removed until only a clean narrative remained. Claire said nothing. She took notes as requested, her pen moving steadily across the page, her expression unchanged. When the meeting ended, Margaret lingered, offering Claire a thin smile and a comment about how refreshing it was to have someone so discreet in the family. "Discretion is rare," she said, "and valuable." Claire met her gaze and nodded politely. "It usually is," she replied. That evening, Ethan returned home later than usual, his tie loosened, his shoulders carrying more than fatigue. He found Claire in the kitchen, preparing a simple meal, something she had insisted on doing herself despite the availability of staff. The normalcy of the scene caught him off guard. "They are talking," he said suddenly, without preamble. Claire turned off the stove and faced him. "About me," he clarified. "About us." "They always were," she said gently. He frowned, surprised by her certainty. "You seem very sure of yourself," he said. Claire considered her words carefully. "I am sure of patterns," she said. "People repeat them when they think no one is paying attention." Ethan studied her, the controlled executive part of him resisting the discomfort her presence stirred. "If you hear something," he said, choosing his words, "something relevant, I need to know." Claire did not answer immediately. She wiped her hands, then looked at him with calm seriousness. "You asked me to be invisible," she said. "That includes what I hear." The reminder landed harder than he expected. He nodded slowly, accepting the boundary he had set. Later that night, Ethan lay awake longer than usual, replaying conversations from the past few weeks, the way his family spoke when they believed control was secure. He had built his career on anticipating risk, yet somehow, the greatest unknown in his life now was the woman sleeping down the hall, the one person who saw him more than she revealed. Claire, meanwhile, sat at the desk in her room, reviewing the notes she had taken throughout the day, not because she needed them, but because writing helped her think. Names, dates, phrases that repeated with slight variations. She closed the notebook and placed it back in the drawer, locking it out of habit rather than fear. She had learned long ago that truth did not need to be announced to be powerful. It needed patience. As the city settled into night, two people occupied the same space with very different understandings of control, and somewhere between their silence and their restraint, the foundations of a carefully protected story were beginning to shift. The moment arrived not with drama, but with exhaustion. It was late, past midnight. When Ethan finally returned home after a 12-hour stretch of meetings that had left his patience thin and his thoughts unsettled, the board vote was approaching, pressure stacking from every direction, and the familiar strategies that usually steadied him no longer worked the way they used to. He expected the penthouse to be quiet, lights dimmed, space empty. Instead, he found Claire in the living room, sitting on the sofa with a book resting unopened in her hands, the city lights reflecting faintly in the glass behind her. She looked up when he entered, her expression calm, unstartled, as if she had been waiting without expectation. Ethan loosened his tie slowly, setting it aside, the silence stretching longer than usual. "You do not sleep much," he said, more observation than question. Claire gave a small nod. "Neither do you." He exhaled, a sound that carried more weight than he intended, and sat across from her, elbows resting on his knees, posture unguarded in a way she had not seen before. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then, abruptly, he looked at her. "Why do you never defend yourself?" he asked, his voice low, stripped of authority. "At dinners, at meetings, with my family. They provoke you. Anyone else would push back." Claire considered him carefully, noting the tension in his shoulders, the faint crease between his brows that appeared only when he was thinking too much. "Because defending myself would make it about me," she said quietly. "And it is not." Ethan frowned. "Then what is it about?" "About what they are protecting," she replied. The answer unsettled him. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair, frustration surfacing. "You speak as if you already understand something I do not." Claire did not deny it. She did not confirm it either. "I understand how people behave when they believe the truth belongs to them," she said, "and how they behave when they believe someone else might see it." Ethan studied her, the analytical part of him searching for angles, while another part, less familiar, simply listened. "You were not supposed to matter," he said, the honesty surprising them both. "This marriage was meant to be simple, contained." Claire accepted the words without flinching. "I know," she said. "That is why you chose me." Silence settled again, but this time it was different, heavier, more intimate. Ethan looked away toward the city, then back at her. "I grew up in that house believing control was the same as safety," he said, speaking more to the room than to her. "My father taught me that appearances keep chaos out. That silence keeps power intact." Claire listened without interruption. "And now," he continued, "I am starting to wonder what silence is actually hiding." The admission hung between them. Claire closed her book and set it aside, giving him her full attention. "Silence does not hide anything on its own," she said gently. "It only gives people space to reveal themselves." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and something shifted. "And what about you?" he asked. "What does your silence reveal?" Claire met his gaze steadily. "That I am still here," she said. "That I am paying attention. That I do not confuse noise with strength." Ethan felt the truth of it settle in his chest, uncomfortable and undeniable. For the first time since their agreement, he did not feel like the one in control of the situation, and oddly, that realization did not frighten him. It grounded him. He stood, signaling the conversation was ending, but paused before leaving the room. "You do not owe me anything beyond the contract," he said. Claire nodded. "I know." As he walked away, Ethan understood that something essential had changed, not in the structure of their arrangement, but in the space between them. The silence they shared was no longer just a rule. It had become a mirror, and he was beginning to see himself reflected in it. The first crack appeared quietly, the way most dangerous things did in the Blackwood world, not as an accusation but as a whisper that traveled faster than facts. It began with a delayed email to the board, then a question raised during a routine compliance review, then a journalist requesting clarification on a decade-old foundation grant that had never before drawn attention. Ethan noticed the pattern immediately, his instincts sharpening as he tracked the source of the inquiries. Someone was stirring old ground, and timing told him it was deliberate. At home, the atmosphere shifted as well. Calls took longer. Meetings closed behind doors that had once been open. When Claire accompanied him to a benefit gala later that week, the smiles were still present, but they were thinner now, more cautious. She felt it in the way conversations stalled when she approached, in the way Margaret watched her with renewed focus, not dismissive anymore, but alert. At the gala, a board member's wife leaned in close to Claire, lowering her voice with false warmth. "It must be strange," she said, marrying into such history. Claire smiled politely. History exists whether we marry into it or not, she replied. The woman laughed, uncertain whether she had been agreed with or dismissed. Across the room, Ethan observed the exchange, unease tightening in his chest. Later that night, back in the car, his composure fractured. They are asking questions, he said sharply, breaking the silence. About grants, about records that should have been settled years ago. Claire turned toward him, her expression attentive but reserved. Questions happen, she said. Only when someone wants answers, he countered. He glanced at her, something unspoken pressing forward. If you know something, he said slowly, now would be the time. Claire held his gaze, the car moving steadily through city lights. Knowing something and speaking it are not the same, she replied. The answer frustrated him more than refusal would have. Over the next few days, tension escalated. An internal memo circulated quietly, suggesting a review of legacy donations. Margaret grew more present, calling Ethan with advice that sounded supportive but carried undertones of warning. Lucas canceled meetings without explanation. At a private lunch, Margaret remarked casually that silence could be misinterpreted, that sometimes loyalty required clarification. Her eyes lingered on Claire as she spoke. Claire did not respond. She focused on her meal, her calm unwavering. The lack of reaction unsettled Margaret far more than confrontation would have. That evening, Ethan confronted Claire again, his restraint thinning. You are becoming a variable, he said, pacing the living room. People are connecting you to these questions, even without evidence. Claire stood near the window, her reflection faint in the glass. Because I do not deny them, she said. Ethan stopped. Why would you not deny something that threatens us? He asked. Claire turned slowly. Because denial without truth creates more questions, she said. And because whatever is coming was always there. I am not the cause. His jaw tightened. Then what are you? He demanded. I am the reminder, she said quietly. The words landed heavily between them. That night, Ethan lay awake replaying every conversation, every choice that had led him here. He had believed control meant anticipating others. He had not anticipated Claire. Meanwhile, Claire sat alone at the desk in her room, the notebook open again, pages filled with careful observations. She did not add anything new. She did not need to. The pattern was complete now. The silence she maintained was no longer invisible. It had become a pressure point, and the family felt it. In trying to bury their past deeper, they had only drawn attention to the ground above it. And Claire understood that the next move would not be hers to make. It would be theirs, and that was exactly why she remained silent. The breaking point came disguised as confirmation. Ethan received the call early in the morning, his legal counsel's voice careful, measured, the way it became when certainty was wrapped in risk. An internal review had uncovered inconsistencies tied to a legacy foundation account, documents that had been quietly amended years ago, signatures that no longer matched originals. The timing aligned too neatly with the recent inquiries to feel accidental. As Ethan listened, his gaze drifted to the closed door down the hall, to the room Claire occupied with her quiet routines and unreadable calm. When the call ended, the certainty that settled over him was sharp and unwelcome. Someone close had known. Someone had chosen not to speak. At breakfast, the air between them felt heavier than it ever had. Claire noticed immediately the way Ethan did not sit, the way he remained standing, his posture rigid, his eyes no longer searching but fixed. We need to talk, he said. She set her cup down slowly, giving him her full attention. The review confirmed alterations, he continued. Records that were supposed to be sealed were not. People are asking how that information resurfaced. Claire waited. You have been present for every conversation, he said, his voice controlled but edged. You heard names, dates. You knew this was coming. Claire did not deny it. I knew there were inconsistencies, she said calmly. The admission landed hard. Ethan's restraint cracked. Then you knew this could destabilize everything, he said. The company, the board, my position. Yes, she replied. And you said nothing. He finished, the accusation now clear. Silence stretched between them, taut and fragile. You asked me not to, Claire said quietly. You asked for invisibility. Ethan turned away, pacing once, then stopping as if the movement itself frustrated him. Do not reduce this to semantics, he said. You let this escalate. Claire rose from her seat, not defensive, but resolute. I did not escalate anything, she said. I did not leak documents or call journalists. I observed what already existed. Observation without action is complicity, he said sharply. The words surprised them both. Claire inhaled slowly, steadying herself. Only if the action protects wrongdoing, she replied. And I could not be certain whose side you were on. The statement struck deeper than he expected. Ethan looked at her, truly looking now, and for the first time saw not an ally or an asset, but a stranger whose moral boundaries did not align neatly with his own. You think I would protect this, he said, gesturing vaguely toward the unseen weight of his family's past. I think you were raised to, Claire said gently. The gentleness did not soften the blow. Something hardened in Ethan then, a reflex born of years spent controlling outcomes. This arrangement cannot survive uncertainty, he said. If you cannot be transparent with me, then you are a liability. Claire absorbed the word without flinching. Then perhaps this arrangement was never what you believed it was, she said. Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair, frustration cresting into resolve. We will maintain appearances until the board vote, he said. After that, we reassess. It was a dismissal disguised as pragmatism. Claire nodded once. I understand. That afternoon, she packed a small bag, essentials only, movements precise and unhurried. She left a note on the desk, not an apology, not an explanation, simply a statement that she would stay with a friend temporarily to give space. When Ethan returned home to an emptier apartment, the silence felt different, not controlled but hollow. He told himself it was necessary, that clarity required distance. Yet as he stood alone, the weight of his decision settled uneasily. Claire, meanwhile, rode in a quiet car across the city, watching familiar streets pass once more, her expression calm but her chest tight. She had anticipated this outcome, had known that silence would eventually be mistaken for betrayal. Still, as the city lights blurred outside the window, she allowed herself one private thought. That truth asked for patience, but patience often came at a personal cost. Neither of them knew yet how much that cost would be, only that the distance between them now carried consequences neither had fully measured. Distance did what silence could. Not. In the days after Claire left the penthouse, the machinery Ethan relied on continued to function, meetings scheduled, statements drafted, counsel consulted, but something essential was missing, a variable he had underestimated. He worked late into the nights, reviewing files that legal teams summarized and sanitized, yet the summaries no longer satisfied him. He began requesting originals, drafts before revisions, emails before threads were trimmed. Patterns emerged that no briefing could soften. Dates shifted slightly. Approval chains rerouted at the last minute. A single name appeared again and again at the margins, a former foundation controller who had resigned quietly after a health matter and disappeared from the public record. Ethan remembered the way Claire had gone still whenever that name surfaced, not alarmed, just attentive. He requested the archived personnel file himself, bypassing assistants, and read until dawn. The controller had flagged discrepancies years earlier, discrepancies that led not to correction but to isolation. His reports were answered with meetings that went nowhere. Then he was gone. Ethan cross-referenced bank ledgers with donation announcements, noticing how funds moved in loops that never closed. It was meticulous, intentional, and unmistakably wrong. By morning, Ethan understood something that cut through his certainty. The silence he had demanded had protected not his family, but the one person who had tried to do the right thing and paid for it. He called a retired auditor who owed him a favor and asked a single question. The answer came back measured and careful. If you open this, the auditor said, it will not stop with the foundation. Ethan ended the call and sat still, the city waking beyond the windows. He thought of Claire's notebook, the way she listened without comment, the restraint that had irritated him because it mirrored the discipline he valued while refusing his control. She had not been hiding the truth from him. She had been waiting to see whether he would choose it. He drove across the city without his driver, the morning traffic steady and indifferent, and stopped outside the modest apartment she was staying in. When she answered the door, surprise flickered briefly before her composure returned. He did not waste time. I was wrong, he said. The words felt insufficient but necessary. You did not let this happen. You endured it. Claire studied him, searching for performance and finding none. I did not want to decide for you, she said quietly. You deserve to see it yourself. He nodded, the admission settling. My family turned silence into a shield, he said. You turned it into a test. She stepped aside and let him in, the space small and honest, nothing hidden. He told her what he had found, names and dates spoken plainly, without defensiveness. She listened, correcting nothing, confirming what needed no embellishment. The controller, she said at last, was blamed without accusation. That is how it works. If he spoke, he lost everything. If he stayed quiet, he lost it slowly. Ethan closed his eyes briefly. And you, he said. Why protect him? Claire's answer was simple. Because he told the truth when it mattered, she said. And because I recognized the cost. The weight of that choice reframed everything. Ethan stood, resolve forming not as anger but clarity. I will open it, he said. All of it. Publicly. Claire did not smile. Then be prepared to lose more than you planned, she said. He met her gaze. I am prepared to lose what was built on it. That afternoon, Ethan instructed counsel to halt damage control and initiate a full independent review, authorizing access to archives long sealed. The board reacted with disbelief, then panic. Margaret called repeatedly, her messages alternating between caution and accusation. Lucas threatened consequences he could not name. Ethan declined every call. When the announcement went out, carefully worded but unmistakable, markets wavered and commentators speculated. Through it all, Claire remained where she was, not by his side, not hidden away, simply present, a constant that did not seek credit. As night fell, Ethan returned to the penthouse alone, removed the ring, and set it on the table beside the contract he had once prized. He realized then that the marriage had never been the leverage he thought it was. It had been the mirror, and the woman he had dismissed as a liability had, through silence alone, given him the only chance to choose who he would be when the truth finally surfaced. The fallout was swift but not chaotic, unfolding with the precision Ethan had always admired and now turned against his own legacy. The independent review began quietly, but its presence rippled outward, auditors requesting access that had not been granted in years, staff pulled into interviews they had long believed would never happen. The board convened in emergency session, voices raised behind closed doors, accusations flying without names attached. Ethan sat at the head of the table, listening without interruption, the calm in his posture unsettling those who expected him to negotiate or retreat. When Margaret spoke, her tone sharpened, warning him of reputational damage, of investors who valued stability over morality. Ethan responded evenly. Stability built on omission is not stability, he said. The room fell silent. News outlets began connecting dots, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. Headlines spoke of transparency, of a powerful company opening its own archives. Analysts debated motive. The public reaction was divided, but curiosity outweighed condemnation. Through it all, Claire remained absent from the narrative by design. Ethan did not mention her. He did not position her as justification or shield. The truth did not need a face, and he was determined not to make her one. Instead, he focused on the man whose name had been buried in footnotes, the former controller whose reports were now re-examined and validated. When the findings confirmed deliberate suppression, accountability followed in measured steps. Resignations were announced. Committees dissolved. The foundation froze operations pending restructuring. Margaret withdrew from public appearances, her influence waning as scrutiny intensified. Lucas issued a statement distancing himself, a move that satisfied no one. One evening, after a particularly long day of hearings and interviews, Ethan returned to the small apartment where Claire stayed. He knocked, waiting without impatience. When she opened the door, he looked different, not diminished, but stripped of something heavy he had carried without question. They are correcting the record, he said simply. Claire nodded, having expected no less. He continued, choosing his words carefully. The controller's name will be cleared. His family compensated. The foundation restructured under external oversight. Claire held his gaze. That matters, she said. He hesitated, then added, I wanted you to hear it from me. They sat at the small table, the noise of the city muted by distance and walls that did not echo. You could have exposed this yourself, he said. At any point. Exposure without choice is coercion, Claire replied. I wanted you to decide whether the truth was worth the cost. Ethan nodded, the lesson settling fully now. It was, he said. Silence followed, but it was no longer tense. It was reflective. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to reputations and reconciliations. Ethan broke the quiet at last. The contract, he said. It is no longer relevant. Claire looked at him steadily. Then release it, she said. He reached into his jacket and placed the folded document on the table, untouched since the night he left it behind. I will, he said. Publicly, if you want. Claire shook her head slightly. Some endings do not need witnesses, she said. He considered that, then met her gaze. I owe you more than an apology, he said. I owe you the respect of a choice. Claire felt the weight of that acknowledgement, not as triumph, but closure. The silence that had once isolated her now felt complete, its purpose fulfilled. Outside, headlines would continue to change, markets would adjust, and the Blackwood name would endure, altered but honest. Inside the small room, two people sat without roles to perform, the truth no longer buried, the cost paid, and the space between them finally free of the silence that had once defined everything. The contract ended without ceremony. Ethan did not announce it, did not frame it as redemption or strategy. He asked for one private meeting with legal counsel, signed the termination himself, and instructed that no statement be issued beyond a simple acknowledgement of a concluded arrangement. When he returned to the apartment, the city outside felt quieter than usual, as if the noise had finally learned restraint. Claire was there, seated by the window, a familiar posture that had once meant distance and now felt like steadiness. He placed the folder on the table between them, opened to the final page, his signature already set. It is finished, he said. Claire looked at the page, then at him. Then we are not bound, she said. No, he replied. We are not. The words lingered, not as relief, but possibility. Ethan hesitated, something uncharacteristic for a man who decided quickly. I want to be clear, he said. Nothing that follows is owed. Not to me, not to what we endured. Claire considered him carefully, then nodded. Clarity matters, she said. Outside, the city lights blinked on as evening settled. Ethan spoke again, slower now. I do not want you to stay because it is safer, he said. Or because leaving would feel like defeat. I want you to choose what you want, without leverage. Claire felt the weight of that invitation. For months, she had existed as a variable others tried to manage, her silence mistaken for passivity. Now, for the first time, the space was hers. She rose and walked to the table, not touching the contract, just acknowledging it as something complete. When I agreed to this, she said, I was choosing survival. When I stayed silent, I was choosing integrity. What I choose now needs to be honest. Ethan watched, his posture open, his expression unguarded. Honest does not mean easy, she continued. It means I am not afraid of the truth we found, or the cost. He nodded, accepting that reality. Nor am I, he said. Claire met his gaze, then did something small and decisive. She pushed the contract folder aside and placed her hand flat on the table, steady. I will not be your wife on paper, she said. But I am willing to be present. As myself. The simplicity of it struck him harder than any declaration. Ethan exhaled, a quiet release. Then let me be present as myself as well, he said. There was no rush to bridge the space between them. They sat, the silence comfortable, unburdened by expectation. Later, they walked outside together, the cool air carrying the sound of traffic and distant voices. Ethan gestured toward the river, lights reflecting in long, broken lines. I used to think leadership was about eliminating uncertainty, he said. Now I think it is about standing still long enough to see it clearly. Claire smiled, not brightly, but sincerely. Standing still is underrated, she said. They stopped at the edge of the walkway, close enough to share warmth without crossing boundaries. Ethan turned to her. There will be consequences, he said. People will keep asking questions. Let them, Claire replied. Questions are how truth stays alive. He nodded, absorbing the quiet strength in her words. When they returned indoors, Ethan retrieved the ring from the table, turning it once in his hand. This belonged to the contract, he said, setting it down. If anything belongs to us, it should not be borrowed from that. Claire appreciated the distinction. Agreed, she said. As the night deepened, they parted without promises, only mutual understanding. The marriage that had begun as strategy ended as choice, and in its place stood something unspoken but real. For the first time since their paths crossed, silence did not protect, or test or expose. It simply existed, shared, no longer a weapon or a shield, but the space in which two people could finally decide who they were willing to become. Tom did not rush them after that. It unfolded naturally, measured not by headlines or board calendars, but by ordinary moments that carried unexpected weight. Ethan stepped back from the constant glare of public appearances, delegating more, listening longer, choosing silence where he once filled space with control. The independent review concluded with reforms that reshaped the foundation and redefined accountability, and though the Blackwood name endured scrutiny, it emerged quieter, humbler, and truer. Claire returned to a life no longer driven by survival alone. She found work aligned with her values, supporting organizations built on transparency rather than image, her presence steady, her voice used sparingly, but with purpose. They met without schedules now, sometimes for coffee near the river, sometimes walking familiar streets where no one recognized them as anything other than two people sharing space. In those moments, Ethan learned the discipline of listening without strategizing, and Claire learned that trust could be built without sacrificing self-respect. One evening, months later, as autumn settled into the city, Ethan invited Claire to a small rooftop garden he had quietly restored atop one of the company buildings, a place once neglected in favor of more impressive views. The skyline stretched beyond them, lights warm against the cooling air. "This space was always here," he said. "I just never thought to use it." Claire smiled softly. "Some things wait until they are noticed," she said. They stood side by side, the distance between them comfortable, chosen. Ethan turned to her, his voice calm, certain in a way that no longer needed authority. "I once asked you for silence," he said. "Now I am asking for honesty." Claire met his gaze, seeing not the cold CEO she had first encountered, but a man who had learned to stand with the truth even when it cost him. "Honesty is not loud," she said. "It just stays." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, simple ring, not the one bound to contracts or expectations, but something unremarkable, chosen deliberately. "I am not asking for a role," he said, "or an arrangement. I am asking if you will choose me, knowing exactly who I am, and who I am still becoming." Claire looked at the ring, then at him, feeling the quiet certainty that had guided her through every difficult choice. She thought of the silence that had protected her integrity, the patience that had exposed a buried truth, and the man who now stood before her without defenses. "Yes," she said simply. She reached for his hand, her grip steady, and slid the ring on herself, a gesture that made him smile in a way no camera had ever captured. They did not announce it. They did not need to. In time, people noticed, not through statements or ceremonies, but through consistency. The way they showed up together, the way Ethan spoke with humility, the way Claire stood without needing recognition. The marriage that began as strategy ended as choice, not because silence exposed a scandal, but because integrity revealed love where no one expected it. As the city lights reflected around them, Claire leaned gently against Ethan's shoulder, and for the first time, silence did not test or protect or expose anything at all. It simply held them, complete and unafraid, a quiet ending earned not by power, but by truth.